That got us 800K additional users in one experiment.
That had a 17% increase on trials started.
You can run 50 different experiments in a month.
You're kind of at the cutting edge of like how to apply this GenAI stuff to experimentation.
Insights into the innovations and revolutions of the marketing world. Welcome to the Marketing Scientists Podcast. Today's guest is Neha Mittal, the CEO of JustWords and a former head of growth and retention at companies like Twitter and Pinterest. Neha and team have done something fantastic and reinvented automated experimentation for lifecycle teams at these major consumer and B2B brands. So let's see what she has in store for us.
Neha, thank you for joining us. This is going to be a ton of fun. I've followed your journey a little bit on LinkedIn with JustWords, so I'm excited to jump in and get to know you a little bit, get to know JustWords a little bit, and talk about all things experimentation. So why don't we actually just start with that? That's the whole premise that you are starting the business with, right? Tell us about the hypothesis that you have.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. And so our company, JustWords, runs with the hypothesis that we want to lead companies to a world of continuous experimentation. And the idea that we want to do A/B testing one at a time is both slow and operationally very heavy for companies to scale. So what we're looking at is a world where we can try theoretically unlimited content over time and then see what sort of jives with your users, resonates with your users, and dynamically switch that out. And so one of the things, going back to the hypothesis that we strongly believe in, is it's not about picking the best content in one shot. It's about driving experimentation velocity. That means if we can run 50 different experiments in a month, that's of a lot more value compared to trying to find what is the best content to throw in the first experiment.
Okay, I like that. How did you decide to build a business around this? Like, tell me a little bit about what the starting point for this hypothesis was. How did you, was this the first thing that you all came up with, or did it take a little bit of iteration? What was that like?
Yeah, always takes iteration though. But so the idea came up in Twitter. So I was heading growth at Twitter, looking at a bunch of things like notifications, push notifications, and emails. And at some point, our growth was tanking, and we're looking for what are ways which we can use to improve growth. And one of the interesting things that would happen is our messaging changes, the copy changes, would make a huge difference. So the example I like to float is how we switched this push notification, Elon tweeted, to Elon just tweeted. So we just added a word, hence the name of the company. And that got us 800K additional users in one experiment. Wait. Hang
on a second. So you changed the notification from Elon tweeted to Elon just tweeted, and that's it? That's it. Wow.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is? Like, I'm so curious about that specific wording, that word choice. Was it just about the dopamine hit of something just happened? It's kind of like breaking news, you think? Or what do you think was going on there?
Yeah, so in context of Twitter, which is very much real-time trending news, right? Recency played a huge role. So the hypothesis eventually was, when somebody sees something just happen, I want to continue catching up on it versus something that I can look up later, right? But that was not obvious going into the experiment.
It's giving me an idea. Maybe all my LinkedIn posts, I'm going to start with hey, I just learned something. I wonder if that's a good one. I'm going to run that experiment. Okay, so you were doing growth at Twitter, now X. Isn't it funny that everyone still says X, formerly Twitter? Every time I read that, I'm like, can we just stop calling it Twitter if that's what the brand wants and just call it X?
Yeah.
Anyway, side topic. Okay, so back to. You were doing all that experimentation. Yeah, let's jump back into your starting journey.
Yeah, so we're doing this, and that's a great aha moment. The team flocks in to see what's going on. And, we run more experiments like that. Those don't show as good results, right? They're flat or maybe we're only seeing incremental gains. But every 1 in 10 experiments would show us a lift like that. And so on one hand, we could never stop prioritizing messaging optimization as one of our growth initiatives. On the other hand, it was a very slow and long process. So each of these experiments in a company like Twitter 1.0 would take us up to 3 months, where we're deciding across different teams what copy and messaging to use, We're then setting up the experimentation. The engineer is going and making a small change in code, which they don't love doing because, that's not challenging enough for them. And then we're analyzing these results and repeating the same cycle. So we couldn't scale ourselves with this model. And that's when the idea of, all right, can we automate some of this stuff started to come in. So we started building some automation using machine learning in Twitter and then eventually at Pinterest too. And that would show us a relative gain of 20%. So we would bring in 20% additional users to the platform with just recommended notifications. And so we would joke about this, that, we should go build a company around within Twitter. And then the whole Elon acquisition happened and we were like, all right, let's go do it. This is the perfect time. So that's where we started with the product. But in Twitter times, we didn't have GenAI. So we were still blocked on bottlenecked by content writers and their ability to give us more and more content to test. So that's a big unlock for us with AI, where now we can complete that flywheel and keep generating new content and keep trying different messaging or copy variants.
Got it. Super interesting. So a couple of things. So you said 1 in 10 worked. That's very consistent with what I've heard from the Microsofts and the Booking.coms and the Amazon. There's a bunch of meta-analysis on experimentation and success rate. And it's usually, in that 10%, 20% range. So it's good to hear that confirmation. When you work with, customers now, do you see the same sort of success rate, or has that sort of changed? Is it different by verticals or segments, or is it the same, like 1 in 10?
Yeah. So I'll give you some specific numbers on that. So what we do see is every time we take a use case, let's say we want to do an upsell use case, which is a very popular one, right? We'd see, sometimes you'd see 4 to 5 auto-tunes. That means copy refreshers until we get the winner. So we do see that. Sometimes it's like 2 auto-tunes, but that's the number where we're like, all right, we've tried enough. There's nothing going on with messaging, but it does take that many auto-tunes to get to the right.
What's an autotune?
Oh, yes, autotune.
My brain went to the musical sense, but like I assume this is different.
So autotune is basically saying we tried a few variations, none of these worked. Let's go and refresh these to new variations. Yeah, see if it's creating an impact. The good thing the two big insights are, one, a lot of times copy suffers from fatigue. So even though we can come to a good winning variant, what we've seen is when we refresh it and we show something new, that ends up outperforming the top winner in the previous run. So that's very interesting for companies that have repeatability, where you're showing the same exact notification again and again to users. And the other thing you've validated is copy does make a difference. There's, without sharing too much, there's like small words like, should we use this emoji or should we use the word AI? Like things like that are making a huge difference on top line business numbers for companies.
I totally believe it. So fun story from my Dropbox days. I was on the growth team for Dropbox Business in 2013, 2014. And one of the simplest changes that we made was there used to be a call to action on the homepage that said, start free trial. Yeah. Pretty simple, pretty easy. We changed it from start free trial to try it free. And that had a 17% increase on trials started. Just bonkers. And that was like one of the first, 5 tests that we ran. I felt like a genius. I was like, this is awesome. This is going to be great. But then very quickly, we realized that if you look at the trial conversion rate 30 days later, and you look at the, month 2, month 3 retention rate, yes, there was a little bit of a lift, but not that much. It kind of evened out. And so I'm curious how you think about also that, right? So not just sort of new user acquisition, but retention and activation over time. Is that something that you look at? Does the platform help with, looking at those numbers? I'm curious about sort of your experience from Twitter and Pinterest as well.
Yeah, so absolutely, right? Like that's important. If we're moving, clicks and whatnot, but that's not impacting top line business metrics, that's not a good outcome for a business. So a couple of things we're doing there. Again, one is we integrate with experimentation platforms that have these numbers. So for example, we don't only look at click rates, but we would look at the DAU, like daily active users move, which is what we did at Twitter too. And that gives a lot of confidence to companies that this is actually moving the needle. The other thing we do is we use the concept of holdouts even in our own experimentation. So we'd say, these are all the things you've tried with JustWords. Here's what the world looked, X days before. And here's the incremental lift that JustWords is giving you. So you're always able to compare life at the current moment compared to, let's say, 90 days back when you thought there's results, but is it even like retaining or giving you long-term retention? So it lets you monitor that.
Got it. So when would, and I have so many questions. So I'm assuming you've built JustWords for other large-scale brands, or is there a specific niche that you're going after, like more B2B, more consumer mobile, more e-commerce, or is it all of them? Like, how do you think about who's a good customer for JustWords?
Yeah, so a really good customer for JustWords is somebody that's B2C because the product works really well for a large amount of data, right? So B2C. Typically, companies are either in social space, productivity space, and interestingly, real estate is starting to come up as a space. So those are the sectors we're starting with. But honestly, fair game as long as you're B2C and you have a pattern for bringing back customers in, looking at win back, right? Which is common for a lot of these companies.
Right,
so.
right. Gotcha. And so do you imagine that in those businesses, you mentioned that you integrate with experimentation platforms, right? There's Eppo, there's StatSig, there's probably, a bunch of others who do interesting things. So it launched darkly, optimized. I don't want to leave anyone out. So how does the integration look like? What do you handle versus what do those platforms handle? And do you see those worlds colliding more in the future? Or do you think of that as a better together story over the long term?
So yeah, we definitely integrate with these platforms. We don't see ourselves going in that space. Like, we're not trying to build a new experimentation platform. And the way the integration works is they would integrate with your Snowflakes, for example, to like start to look at raw data and figure out experimentation exposure and whatnot. We integrate with them and we give a more granular view based on every message that you've sent. So the way the view for our customer is, all right, top line, here's how JustWords has moved numbers, but I can click into JustWords and start to look at a very granular view of what happened to every cohort, what messaging worked out, what are my insights, what is the next best thing to do. So we give them that.
Got it. So in many ways, like, you would work with the Lifecycle team or the team that's kind of looking at the in-app notifications and those best. Got it. So that makes a ton of sense. What about SMS? Would that be interesting for you all? Like, is that part of the scope or is it a little bit different?
Yeah. So for one of our customers, we are doing SMSs. Like, that's a big channel for them. And there's twofold advantages. Obviously, there's the growth gains that they're going to see directly by somebody opening the SMS. SMS is a huge cost for companies. So they're looking at, how do I optimize the character length, for example, to still get those gains, but cut down my costs and send one SMS rather than 3 SMSs.
That makes a ton of sense. Okay. Now, you mentioned that a huge unlock for you was all the GenAI stuff, right? You could do this, but you were still blocked on, copy and content. I'm both a believer and a skeptic of all the GenAI stuff, right? I speak from both sides of my mouth. There are days when I'm like, yeah, it's awesome. And then there are days when I'm like, well, this is just dumb. So how do you balance the idea that GenAI is essentially a summarization of everything that has been written on the internet before versus, right, the true serendipity or the creativity or the human mind's ability to kind of think out of the box and think laterally? How do you balance that with what you're doing with JustWords?
Yeah, that's a good question. So going in, I was a skeptic too, and I was like, I don't want to build a better GPT. I don't think there's a world anyway. But I still strongly believe that creativity will be a huge component of what we're doing. And so the way we've structured how we generate new messaging or copy, there's 3 sort of you can call it data sources that we take inputs from as we come up with this best message. The first one is best practices. So these are best practices which we are seeing in real time across customers. They're not trained on 2021 data. Because if you just look at that data, it's going to tell you, here are all the buzzwords to use and elevate your messaging, whatnot, right? So we can get rid of that very quickly by encoding these best practices. The second thing we look at is all of the experimentation data that we're getting by running all these variants. So all those insights are encoded back into the generation model. So you can actually start to use what's working for your users, your sector, your company, and bring that back in, right? Like there is no pharaoh to it. Like that's why dynamic experimentation makes sense rather than using any offline model to do the same. And the third thing we do is we do work with Lifecycle marketing team as our core customer, right? We encourage them to try bold things. Like this is your platform. Go ahead and try. This is your playground to try different content messaging, different value props, different incentives. And so a lot of times you see ideas coming from them where they're like, okay, why don't we try something more humorous, right? And see what happens. And there's enough like space for them to keep contributing to that. And that prevents us from getting stuck in a local maxima, if you would, right? Where it's stuttering the same thing over and over again and you're not able to use creativity the right way.
Got it. Okay. This is a good segue. So, you talk about, you've been around for a year, is that right? And you went through YC or a couple of,
Yes.
Less than a year. Wow. Okay. So, maybe we'll switch gears and talk about sort of what that journey has been like. Like, how have you found your first few customers? How do you get them? Have you done experimentation in that part of it? Now we're talking about B2B marketing and sales, very different from JustWords business, right? But I'm curious what your take has been in building the business from that perspective.
Yeah. Oh God, so much to learn there. Well, I think the first thing that also YC really helped us course correct was to figure out who are we solving the pain for? What's the painkiller here, right? And to be more specific, we were starting with smaller companies to see if they can use us. The reality was it wasn't a big enough pain for them. They had survival problems. They needed their basic infrastructure to be set in place, right? So we very quickly course corrected to, okay, this is a big company product. And now most of our customers are enterprises. So that was that. The second thing was to understand, like, who is the champion? Who is the kind of person who's an early believer of, just an early believer who's ready to try a half-baked product? Because the reality of what we've built so far, and it's gotten very complex, is we wouldn't have built it the way we wouldn't have built it without these customers. Right. Yes, there are customers, but they contributed quite a bit in shaping the product for what it is today. So that's a very big insight where initially going in, it felt like a crazy idea to not build enough before talking to customers. In hindsight, it all makes sense. So that's been a pretty good insight for us.
Yeah. The co-creation part is so essential, right? It's there are companies and products where you can just kind of, like ChatGPT is a great example. You just were at it for 7 years and then you had an amazing breakthrough. But then for most of us, it's, co-creating, especially when you get into like the actual workflows of something versus like core hard tech, which I think you just have to go and spend time on R&D for. Okay, interesting. What's been the most surprising experiment with customers or, from your own experience that comes to mind? Like that one was surprising to me, like the Elon just tweeted, but I'm curious if there's anything else that comes to mind to you.
Yeah, quite a few. I'll share another one. So we experimented with BeReal, their push notifications, right? And they are a very global company. They look at various different languages. And one of the things when we started with them, they said, okay, we have a fatigue problem for sure. We want to see how quickly we should refresh copy to solve for fatigue. And also we have all these different languages we want to try this for. So the way we set up their experiment was we said, all right, let's pick 4 different languages and we'll throw in 10 different variations for each language. We're testing 40 variants now, right? And the interesting thing was every language had a different winner. So they were only it was just the same content translated in different languages. And earlier they would only test in English and ship in all the different languages. But for the first time, they could see, like some cultures like emojis more than others, that was a very strong insight because now they could optimize messaging for every single country and location. That's something that wasn't possible with a traditional A/B test because it doesn't scale.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's such a good example for like companies that are multilingual from the get-go, right? So most consumer apps, if you're in more than a few geographies, that's amazing. Okay. Very cool. Let's maybe switch gears a little bit and talk about sort of AI more generally, right? So you've been steeping in the startup world. You went through YC. You've been working with these customers. You're kind of at the cutting edge of like how to apply this Gen AI stuff to experimentation. Who else do you think is doing a good job of making all the Gen AI stuff actionable and not just in a fluffy way, but like seeing good results? Like what are you seeing?
Well, the last GenAI tool I used and I fell in love with was Cursor.
Okay.
I've been rusty with my coding skills and I would love to get into it. And honestly, there's a big friction point, right? Like how can I quickly get started and start coding again? And it was amazing that it took care of most of the things that I would have to worry about in terms of the system architecture, design, whatnot. Right, I just needed my basic foundations and...
Okay, I have no clue what Cursor is. So I've seen the tweets, I've seen the thing, but it's just with all the things that have happened at work, like I haven't found the time to like really pay attention. To break it down for us. What is Cursor?
Yeah, so Cursor is basically your co-pilot for coding, right? You can write code very easily with it. Except the interesting things that they've done is they've very nicely, they provide an IDE, so like a developer environment where you can start to write prompts and it works very closely with your existing code. So unlike it's not a copilot where you're starting from scratch or you're trying to find how to integrate what GPT produced back into the code. It looks at your design patterns, your code, and then it figures out how to add functions or code that relates with your code. And sometimes it gets very smart. There was a time that I was trying to fix like a UI section on our page or on our dashboard. And I had a certain design in mind and it completely changed the design. And I was like, this actually looks better. I'll go with this one.
Wow. Wait, so was that not part of GitHub Copilot? Because I know like GitHub was obviously first to market with a whole bunch of this, right? So is their stuff more general and Cursor is kind of like customized to your code base? That's the difference?
I think so. Like it does a better job of understanding those patterns. I don't know exactly what tech they're using to make it better. I followed like you. I followed all the tweets. My co-founder recommended it, and I was like, all right, worth a shot.
Okay, amazing. Has that become part of your habit, or maybe not quite?
Getting there, yeah. Like we could see efficiency gains where we're like we don't need like front-end engineers as much as we thought we do. I mean, we still need engineers, we still need full-time people, but we can cut out maybe half an engineer now.
That's pretty cool. Okay. So what advice, so let's say we are talking to, consumer mobile, consumer startups, not startups, but like large companies. I think that's your sort of ICP. What do they need to do to get up and running with JustWords? Like, what is the infrastructure? What does a successful implementation look like?
Yeah. So when we work with these companies, they all mostly have, most of them have custom infra. Like it's all built, with legacy code, whatnot. So one thing we've made super simple is it's as simple as an API integration. Or if you use any of your MarTech stack like Iterable or Braze or HubSpot, we just directly do a plug-and-play integration. So it takes as little as a few hours, maybe a week if you have really custom infra, but we can get set up and get going in a week's time. And that's a big value add for people because they can start to see results in a month's time right after.
Gotcha. Do you get often like involved in, will we have statistical significance? And like, how do you figure that stuff out? Is that part of the pre-sales process or you're like, no, if you're, talk to me about that.
Yeah. So statistic results are baked into the product. So we don't ship anything until we see statistic results. We don't auto-tune until we see statistic results. So it's a very, we look at variances. So it's a very heavy statistical product from that sense. Yeah.
So I'm curious on that one, right? So one of the things that we sort of see with customers often is, oh, hey, how's that campaign doing, right? Like the classic sort of peaking problem. Do you suffer from that? Do your customers suffer from that? Is there a natural bias to want to see the results now, even though we're not there yet? Like, how do you tackle that in your experience?
Yeah. So something that comes up all the time is like, how is each one doing? How much are we auto-tune? Can we ship? Can we not? Right? Like, how do we make quick decisions around it? And so I think if you see our dashboard, you'll see it's green or it's very red or it's very like neutral. So that's a signal like, hey, hold up, like you need a little bit more time before it gets more static. The other things sort of, again, product feature we've baked in are things like, hey, let's get you static in 2 weeks. And that means we could maybe do with fewer variants and get your results faster rather than testing 60 different variants if you don't have that kind of volume. And that's, we recommend that because that's a win-win. You start to see faster results with fewer variations rather than trying to test the whole world and not getting to a decision point there.
Gotcha. And so let's say you run one of these first tests and, you ran it for like 4 weeks, you got some results. After that, the next set of Autotune, is that something that the customer is just like, okay, let's just keep running this every month type of thing? Or does it plateau? And I know you guys are like still figuring it out, but I'm curious what that journey looks like with every customer.
That's actually a great question. And we spend a lot of time thinking about it. So the way we auto-tune is we'd have some inbuilt rules for it. For example, are we seeing static results? Of course. What is sort of our time window? We want to give enough time to every variation before we make a decision on it, even if it's static or not. Do we have thresholds? For example, if we are seeing a dip of let's say 1% in click rates, we definitely don't want to deal with this messaging variant because it's hurting our performance, right? So let's auto archive. So there's all these rules and they get very complex over time, but that's something that we configure for them. And depending on each company and their use case, they can go in and tweak those. And that's how we define how this auto-tuning works over time. And I guess there's a second part to the decision making where it's like, should we keep auto-tuning or should we ship something? Where do we end? Like, what does end look like? And typically with MAB, what we have seen is usually if auto-tune works, we will see a good winner at some point. We'll see most of the traffic getting diverted to that winner. And that's a good stopping point for us to say, all right, let's stop, revisit it if you want to. If that doesn't happen, then we propose what we were discussing. Let's try at least 4 to 5 auto-tunes before we stop the experiment.
Got it. So let's say you got to a steady state. You found that winner. Most of the traffic's getting switched over to that variant. How does JustWords then justify your existence, or what do you do then with that customer? How do you keep it as a sticky business?
Yeah, so this is, we were talking depth, right? If we step back and look at the breadth, this is one use case in one channel, right? So let's say this is the win-back use case that we're looking at in emails. Then we would look at all the use cases from onboarding to dormant users to whatnot, you know it. Those are all the 100 campaigns that they're running that they can optimize. Within each campaign, they would have a series of emails that they're optimizing. So that adds up, right? And that's just email. Then you can map this back to push, to websites, to ads, SEO, whatnot, right? And you look at the whole world of messaging, and it's so actually we encourage them to try more and more use cases rather than worrying about only one use case at a time.
Got it. Amazing. Awesome. This has been really interesting. Do you think that, there's a copy side of it? And I am assuming the reason you started with, notifications and SMS and emails is there's a heavier sort of copy element to it. When you go into something that's a little bit more multimodal, right? So if you're looking at graphics and videos and, that's where sort of the ad world comes in. There's obviously lots of static ads, but there's like dynamic ads. Do you think GenAI is in a good enough position to be able to make that leap, or still kind of, lots of stuff to figure out?
Personally, we've taken a different angle. So we're going from copy to content, and I'll talk about what that means.
Yeah.
Instead of copy to images and video, because we can testing out different images and assets. That's easy for us to do in terms of what traffic is going where. But we're not going into generating those because we don't think the quality is good enough for us to go and auto-tune on those images without a creative person coming in just yet. And so our focus has been sure we solve for static copy, let's go into content. So can we templatize every single thing from various topics of interest to different personas to also just all sorts of signals that you're getting from users? How do we actually now give you recommendations on different pieces of content?
Got it. Okay. So one final sort of question for you before we bring this to a wrap. If I'm a lifecycle marketer at a top consumer mobile company, what advice would you have based on everything that you've seen? What are the like 3 things that I must do in the last 4 months of this year to maximize growth?
Yeah. Well, the first one would be, I think being a founder is not the only way to contribute or learn about AI and whatnot. I mean, I jumped ship because this was very exciting as a wave. I think trying out different products in AI space is a must if you want to stay on top of what's going on. And so go give it a try. Like, go try our various AI products, go try them internally or externally, right? Like, I think it's a miss to not stay on top of those things. And I'm barely catching up with all these. Every day there's new tools coming up. So I'd say that's a must. If you're not doing that, go ahead, try different products. Yeah. And the second thing I would say is, I think it's important to distinguish tech from products. So a lot of times, like, oh, there's GenAI, there's GPT, there's MAB, right? Like all this is tech, but a lot of times MAB is not usable unless it's shaped like a product that works with your stack and works for your use cases. So look out for those, right? Like, look out for how do things integrate with your marketing MarTech stack? How does this work for your particular company? Do you have enough users to make it work? Things like that, right? Like we have this misconception that we hear all the time where it's like, oh, this tool has MAB, I'm just going to check a box and it'll work. And it's like, no, you don't have enough users to make it work. There's so much complexity that goes into it that, like, you don't want to even bother yourself with it, but at least have that understanding so you can make the right decisions on what stack to pick. And I'd say the third reason why it's very important to sort of stay on top of all of this is, I'm sure, like, we're looking in MarTech stack, right? It comes and goes in bundles and unbundling. Like, there's the unbundling and bundling going on, right? And what happens, the downside of that is you're stuck in some unbundled world of things, and you have to now figure out how to scale your MarTech software for your companies, right? So right now is a good time to try out these different things, and you'd be in a better place 6 months down the lane to figure out what's that bundle for your company that makes sense, especially in the MarTech space. So that's what I would say is probably.
Yeah. The bundling and the unbundling is classic. And, I don't know if you feel the same way, but MarTech is hard, right? It's just like the space is just hard. I think probably one of the hardest ones. And but this was, Neha, this was fantastic. Thank you for educating me on all of the stuff that you all are doing. And I'm excited to see how, JustWords evolves and expands. So thanks again for joining, and we'll maybe catch up again in a few months and see what you're up to.
Yeah, that sounds perfect. Thanks, Pranav. Thanks for inviting me. It was a great chat.
Well, there you go, folks. That was Neha, CEO of JustWords. We'll have many more fun and insightful conversations next week, so tune in again. See you then.